This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our biweekly board chair check-in and update meeting. My name is Will Marie Newton, and I will be moderating this call. In order to avoid background noise, I ask that you please mute yourself if you're not speaking. However, you can unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question, or you can type it into the chat box. If you're calling in from your cell phone, please take a moment to physically mute your cell phone, as I'm unable to mute you from my computer unless I mute all participants. Please note this meeting is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website under services. Thank you.
Okay, so today we're very lucky to have with us Lynn Sosa, and if Dr. Lynn Sosa, and if you've been listening to the Tuesday morning calls, you know that she is a great repository of so much information, so logical, so thoughtful, and we thought we'd give our board chairs the chance to talk with her, ask their questions, hear a little from her. I looked at her bio last night, and I don't want to go through the whole thing, but she's at the Department of Health. She's coordinator of the TB and STD control programs and the deputy state epidemiologist. And she is just terrific. And the other one, who I don't see yet on the call, but we all know, oh, she's on now. Charlene Russell Tucker is a deputy at the State Department of Education. And I wanted to give them both a chance to speak to you, to be able to first let us know what's going on. I have some questions that Patrice helped me come up with. And I know Lynn has to go at 11:30. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn and Charlene, and we'll do our check-in and updates at 11:30 or so. So with that, Lynn and Charlene, thank you so much for being here. And if you're ready, let's go.
All right, that sounds great. Lynn, I'll just start off by Bob thanking you for inviting us to join today, just to share updates and basically to listen to you and to answer your questions. We recognize the hard work that you're involved in every day in your systems, and we just want to make sure that we're here to support you. And really, that's really what it is. We're working 24/7 to make sure that we can support you. And I have to also say, I so appreciate the partnership with the Department of Public Health. I joked with the commissioner yesterday that I really think I work for DPH right now. It really is. So I really want to take up the time because I know we don't have a lot of time with you, and we want to make sure we can answer all your questions. So I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Sosa.
Sure, and thanks, Charlene. I think we've learned through all of this that the collaboration and communication are key. So Charlene and I are talking on a regular basis, and it's afforded me the opportunity to get to know her and her great team. And I think Bob, you were asking kind of what advice can we impart on this group, and I think it really is that. It's really having really open communication and collaboration between the boards of ed, between their schools, and in particular with the local health department, because they're the ones that are really tasked with really all aspects of the on-the-ground management of this pandemic, especially when it comes to cases in schools and contact tracing and really providing the advice to the schools and really to everybody, right? Because they're the ones that are responsible for that contact tracing and for all venues. So if you have good communication with your local health department, you're going to be in really good shape for whatever comes your way.
And just to add to that, Dr. Sosa, I hope that you now are aware of our Tuesday mornings, our 8 to 9 Health and Safety Tuesdays, where you can get on those calls. Sometimes I'm hearing it's just good to listen to what the other questions are and the responses that are provided, because chances are that you have similar questions. And certainly you can send questions ahead of time to us that we can be organized in making sure we get responses to you. Just quickly, I know that you're all now very much aware of Addendum 4, and which we've now worked on revising to make sure that there's some levels of alignment with the town alert systems that is now out there. And Dr. Sosa did a nice job explaining that on Tuesday morning, and we're getting ready, hopefully by the end of today, to send out the revision to the addendum 4 so that everyone will have it. And then we'll feature that Tuesday morning just to be able to help folks get an understanding of where we are. So Bob, I think we'll probably stop there and take the questions that from the team.
Okay.
So
Did
Bob,
someone-
before we get started, I did receive
Sure.
a question in the chat box. So this
Rip.
person would like to hear whether CABE has any input on the last executive order 9H from the governor, specifically how this might affect public comment and whether, in your opinion, it applies to boards who are still meeting virtually.
Okay. I don't think we put out anything in detail. Oh,
Bob,
Patrice
this
is on. Great.
Do you want me to take that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It actually might be more helpful if we held that and use the time that we have with Charlene and Lynn for the more health-oriented questions. I have a question for them. In the new municipal alert system, could you, Lynn, you did such a great job on the Tuesday morning call talking about what that means and doesn't mean for schools. Perhaps you could share a little bit of that with our board chairs.
Sure. So I think part of this just starts with understanding kind of what the town level alert means and how that data are calculated. And it can be challenging. So basically what we're trying to do with that alert level is to put the information in a way that makes it comparable between towns. So what is being used to calculate those alert levels is a case rate. And it's looking at the number of cases over a 14-day period. And the reason that we look at 14 days is, as with everything in this pandemic, you know, some days in a town, the number of cases or tests reported might be low, and then the next day they might be high, right? So by being able to look at a little bit longer period of time, we're able to account for those ups and downs, but then also allows us a little bit more time to actually look at a trend and feel comfortable that we're looking at a trend, especially now that we're trying to categorize the case rates in this yellow, orange, red kind of alert level. So we want to be comfortable that what we're seeing is going to be a stable thing that we're looking at. Now, granted, I think we all recognize that Connecticut has lots of small towns. So when you start to then do that for small towns, there still can be that up and down. But if we look at that 14-day period, that accounts for some of that. And so, so what we're doing there is looking at that 14 days of cases and looking at a rate. So trying to standardize those cases for a particular population number. And the number that we do it for is per 100,000. And the reason I'll say is that's just really kind of a standard way when we calculate rates. Again, we try to do this not just for COVID-19, but for any disease that we're looking at. So as Bob said, before COVID-19, I spent a lot of time looking at STDs and tuberculosis. And so we would calculate the rate. I know it's funny. It's a thing. Let me say those diseases are still out there. But we want to be able to understand how much of a disease is happening in a certain population. And so by looking at a standard population level, that allows us to understand that the number of cases in one town is similar to a number of cases in another town. So what that means, though, is that it does take a fewer number of absolute cases to get to a certain rate, right? Because we're trying to understand the number of cases per population. So when there's less people living in a town, it takes fewer cases to kind of reach that threshold. So for example, as we were looking at last week, a town, I'm not trying to pick on anybody, a town like Bethany, which only had 10 cases, their rate ended up being the same as a town like Waterbury, which had 200 cases for the same period of time. So, and that's important. So that allows us to say, well, you know, yes, the number of cases is low, but for that population, that's a lot. right? And that's important for us to understand. And so that allows us to look at, say, all of the orange towns. And even though one orange town might have 5,000 people, but another orange town has 100,000 people, we kind of have a sense that it's the same impact for that town. So then the question is kind of what, so now that we have this, and part of this is to just try to get people's attention, which I think we have, and awareness of what is going on in their communities, and trying to understand, well, what is going on in my town compared to the town next door or a town in another part of the state. So I think that that is hopefully does a good job doing that. And again, it's focused on case rates only, while we are telling people about test positivity at the same time, as well as a number of other indicators, as with the school metrics. This town alert levels are based solely on case rates. So then it begs the question, okay, so now once my town is a certain color, what does that mean? And so then there are that accompanying recommendations and things that towns need to consider for all kinds of things. It's like on the individual level, what do I need to think about if my town is orange? What does a town need to think about for their restaurants? What do they need to think about for gatherings and things like that? And so now you throw in schools in there. And so this is tricky because we are now a couple of months into having school, which is great. And we've learned a lot from that time. And so far, we're not seeing a lot of cases that are occurring because of transmission in the school. I'm not saying it's never happened, but it's not happening a lot, which is good. That means that the mitigation measures that schools have spent so much time doing and talking about and implementing and reinforcing every single day are making a difference. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have cases in a school, because we are trying to have school in a setting where we do have a lot of cases in the community, right? So inevitably, schools are going to see some of those cases. If there's cases in the community and those community members are attending school or working in school, then we're going to see those cases in the school and impact the school, right? And so that's really what we're seeing now. And we're all trying to kind of live and weave our way through that. So as Charlene alluded to, when we developed Addendum 4 earlier in the summer, that was based on the best information that we had at the time. And it was in a setting really before we had the experience of actually trying to do this. And so now we've actually gotten a couple of months experience, and now we're trying to put all of that in the context of what is going on now, which unfortunately is a situation which we all have been hopefully trying to be prepared for, is a situation where we are again seeing an increase in cases all over the state. And hopefully it will not get as bad as the spring, but we're all trying to kind of manage that. And it's a little bit different, right? Because in the spring, everything was closed. Now, those things are open to some degree or not, and we're trying to kind of navigate that. And so when it comes to schools, I think what we've learned is that because of the mitigation measures, we probably have a lot more flexibility, assuming those mitigation measures are in place, for keeping school open a little bit longer. And I think what you'll see in Addendum 4 is that it really is a continuum. And there's a lot of things that go into that. And it's not, and I hope you've heard me say, it's never been about the numbers themselves. It's really about the numbers in addition to the mitigation measures in the school, in addition to, and I think we all have to be honest, like what is the community's, tolerance for the cases? Like, how are they feeling? Like, how are they experiencing the current situation, right? Because I do think that plays a role. Like if a town is like, look, we can't handle this, like we're worried, we're anxious, that obviously is going to play a role when it comes to decisions about, whether we can have school or not, and things like that. So it's really part of that kind of whole conversation. And I think that's really the upshot of this, is that as cases increase in a community where schools are, going back to what I said originally, it's really about having the conversation about how the community cases are affecting the schools and kind of what needs to happen. And I think we've already seen that. I think a lot of schools that are in these communities are staying open, but some aren't, because, for example, the high school just has too many cases to keep up with contact tracing, or too many teachers are exposed, and you just can't have school, right? And so, and that makes sense, right? In some situations, that might be that the school community, like all of the schools in a certain town, are either too affected or the perception or the feeling of the community is that school is not where we want people to be right now. So we need to take that pause and go remote and focus on that. So I think what we're trying to emphasize is the flexibility and responding to all of the factors that go into the decision making about school and the model that the school is in. So,
Lynn,
Charlene, please add.
Yeah, no, what I was going to add to that, Lynn, and I know, thank you for that really great explanation. With everything that Dr. Sosa just talked about and the individual situation, what local health is learning when they're doing contact tracing as to what's happening or what has happened or caused things. We hear those stories a lot. You don't get that flavor when all you hear is that there's a case in a community, or there are cases in a community, or they're going into remote learning, or they're coming back out. And so it may seem arbitrary. And, you know, we've read the articles like others did that the state doesn't have a standard process or procedure. And it truly is not that. It really is about customizing the approach with a lot more information that may not be easily available to others to know. And maybe we should know what some of those issues are. But the key piece is that the lines of communication are open, and superintendents, boards, local health, they are together around the table making these decisions, so the community can also have confidence in the decisions that's being made.
I just want to ask a question, an overall question, Dr. Sosa. Are we in what we were worried about, sort of the second stage, or is that going to happen? Do you think it's going to get worse as the winter goes on? And I know I'm asking you very tough questions, but I think everybody feels like we've been in this forever already. So I just wanted your opinion, and I know, you know, you can't say, yes, this is what we were expecting and it will end soon or anything like that.
I definitely can't say when it's going to end, but I think if you look, I was actually just looking at our weekly report. I mean, if you just look at our Thursday reports, which are our more comprehensive reports of what's going on in the state, I think it's on the third page. We show you a nice graph that shows you and this is a case number graph. So just number of cases, right? Since July. And it very clearly shows it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So whether it's the second wave or whatever you want to call it, the reality is that we are seeing a lot more cases, and how high those numbers get, I don't think any of us can say. I mean, that's why we're trying to emphasize everything that we are doing. And that was, I think, one of the impetuses for the town alert level, is that it's really easy to kind of live in your bubble, right? And not really like, okay, I'm just trying to make sure my kids are going to school, whatever model that is, I'm just trying to do my work. But it is important to understand what's going on in your community, and then also look around and say, okay, well, what's going on here? Maybe my town is really small, so we actually aren't a color, but all the towns around me are a color. That's probably telling me something, right? And then people need to be thinking about that in terms of what they're doing, because a lot of what is driving the cases now are not, big events, because we're not having them, right? It's really small things. Unfortunately, sports does play a role sometimes. It's those small gatherings, and you're right, people are tired, but unfortunately, this is the time where we really need to redouble our efforts at all levels if we don't want the number of cases to get to where they were in the spring. And I really hope that they don't.
Thank you. Marie, I know there are a couple of questions from board chairs, and this is who our workshop is for. So could you ask those questions, please?
Michelle has a question about age reporting. Michelle, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi, thank you. This sort of follows up on everything you've just shared about the schools being a fairly safe setting, and it's really good to know that. And I've been following the Thursday reports where you have a really nice graph of the age incidents. And I was wondering if that would be useful to, I think personally, it's reassuring to me. I've already come to the conclusion that schools are fairly safe. And I know that the 0 to 9 is one category and 10 to 19 is another, which includes some of the college kids I know. But in general, I think it's been very reassuring to me to see those levels remaining fairly low. And I would love to see that as maybe one of the indicators that gets reported to the schools, because I do think there's a lot of fear when people see cases going up, but it may be in an elder care facility, or it may be not something near the school. So I think that's useful information, and I thank you for putting it out there, but I would love to see it shared more widely with the public.
So I'll just address so if you look in some of the maps that we're showing, we do take out like the cases that are in nursing homes, assisted livings, and correctional facilities to account for some of that. So really looking at the community cases. I think the other thing, so two things in terms of, I think we can make some safe assumptions about people in the 5 to 18 age group, right? They're almost all going to be attending a school of some kind, right? And so I think we can say something about that group without having to report it. I understand what you're saying. I think part of the issue though here is that we are seeing increased incidents really across all the age groups. And I would like having, and I'm cheating because I actually saw today's, obviously I see today's report before everybody else sees today's report. And one thing that I noticed as I was looking at it is that I think some of those differences are actually evening out a little bit. So I think like the colleges, you know, if you saw in the summer, like that graph went way up, right, for those kids because of how much testing all of a sudden started happening in that group. But one thing that I kind of struck me when and again, looking at like 20 something pages, but I did look at that. And then I'm thinking about the other things that we're doing, like when we're looking at town level cases and town level increases, we're not seeing them in one age group. We're seeing it really across the board. And I think what that supports is what we're hearing from our local health departments who are doing contact tracing, is that when they're seeing cases, it's like whole families, right? Or whole households. So it makes sense that whoever's living in that household, like if the parent has it, then probably one or two of the kids are going to get it, right? Or vice versa. Or if if a grandparent is living in the household, then a bunch of other people are going to get it. So that kind of evening out is, I think, supports kind of how we're seeing transmission happen. Now that said, can you use that data to support schools being safer? And again, I think you all know that is not a word we like to use, right? Because everything that we're doing right now, unless you are staying home and never leaving or interacting with any other human being, there's risk, right? And we all have to acknowledge that, and that's why we're doing all the things that we do. But it's really about mitigating that risk as much as possible. So I guess from my standpoint, I would focus more on those things than about a certain age group being less risky, which may, and tell me if I'm wrong about what you were trying to get at, because I think that might not be the right message, because we have to assume that everybody in a school has some risk, right? Because they're leaving their house. And especially with how transmission is happening, I think that could be a little bit tricky.
Michelle?
Thank you.
Still there?
Yeah, no, thank you. That helps a great deal in explaining everything. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Marie, we have another question.
Candace, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. I was curious. I've been listening to what you were saying, and what I'm hearing you describe is very much what I think our superintendent has been doing, in that he recently made a decision for our district for the time being to stay in the hybrid model rather than to fully come back, despite the fact that many districts around us are not exactly doing that. And I think it's been a holistic approach, looking at the trends, looking at our facilities and what we can do to mitigate, specific to our community, et cetera. However, I'm struggling a little on the board because there are a couple of board members who really want a very data-driven metric that is sort of immutable to describe how he's making these decisions. And if he's not making them in line with that immutable type of metric, then he's making it, like some kind of gut decision that's not really valid, in a nutshell, to paraphrase. And I'm wondering, is there anything from you guys, like that could help support the more holistic approach? Any written materials? Because all we've got is like that, the 3 levels and the graph, is my question.
So I think, Charlene, would you agree that addendum 4 in the new format, I think supports that holistic approach perhaps a little bit more?
Yes, what you will see previewing a little bit, for those of you who used addendum 4, we had really very specific color blocks with numbers, and it's so easy to get locked into where you are. And frankly, we've now gone up with a gradation that really shows things kind of morphing in a continuum in that. And we also, in terms of the secondary, the indicated considerations, that we've also specifically called out a new term we're calling person density, right? And the need to look at the density of the numbers of folks in the buildings, kind of regardless of whether you're calling it hybrid or whether your numbers are lower because of the numbers of families who've chosen to go into remote learning or opting into remote learning. So I believe that hopefully when you see it, that it will allow that kind of a conversation and dialogue to take place, because there's really not this hard and fast number that's going to say this is what you do. But I understand, and the communication is so critical. And I go back to, if we sound a little, it's so important if everyone can be messaging, providing the same message around the decision making.
And just to follow up quickly, I'm sorry. So
Go ahead.
would it be fair to say that the Department of Education and the Department of Public Health have transitioned away from that like 3-tier model into a new way of looking at it? Or is that original 3-tier model still in play?
I'm trying to figure out how best to respond to that. Well, would we call it a 3-tier model? I would just say we're now informed and recalibrating, and I think really more emphasizing the need for looking at person density and applying that to all the data that's there. I'm looking for Lynn for a lifeline here.
I think the word is maybe continuum.
Yeah.
It's really a continuum. And again, trying to help people so that they aren't fixated on, I've crossed, now I'm 10.1, so that means X. It's really trying to, again, put that number in context, but recognizing what the number is and how that number affects your community, right? So if you're a community that's at 25 per 100,000, that's a lot of cases, and you are unlikely to be a school that will have no cases if you're living in a community with that many cases. Does that mean that you can't operate in hybrid? Maybe not, right? Again, so that's where we are trying to kind of be able to allow schools and districts to have that conversation about, okay, we are a town where there's a lot of community transmission. How is that impacting our school, right? And how can we mitigate that risk, right? And, does it make sense for us, based on what is going on in our community and what's going on in our school setting, to continue to have school in person, whatever model that is? Or because of all these things, we need to go remote. It's really about taking the number, understanding how it's affecting the community, and then making the decision.
I want to, because it's 11:30, and I wanted to thank Lynn, and I know she has to leave. Charlene, you're, as always, please feel free to stay on. But I want to just thank the both of you. There are a few people who, through this crisis, you could count on for good information, thoughtful information, no panicking, understanding the facts. Lynn and Charlene have just been wonderful. And I think we all owe them a debt of gratitude for their hard work. Again, if you haven't tuned in to Tuesday mornings, you're missing something really special. They ask great questions, and Lynn and her team from DPH, and of course Charlene, who we've long known is a wonderful friend of ours, just do a terrific job. So thank you. We'd love to have you come back on this show again at some point. And hopefully the numbers then will be going down. So
I hope so as well. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all for everything that you're doing every day. We know this is a challenge, but we're in it together. And I think that's where the hope is, that we're working on this together. So thank you all for everything that you're doing every day. And for you to make sure you're taking care of yourselves, that is so critical. You've got to make sure really you put your mask on first before you're able to put that on others around you. So thank you all very much. Be safe and be well.
Thanks, Charlene. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrice. We know we had a question about board meetings and our board chair share.
Terrific. And that was actually the one update that I was going to provide. The governor did issue a new executive order on Wednesday that pertains to public meetings. It continues, it does not replace the previous executive order from back in March, which allows for fully remote public meetings, including Board of Education meetings. But the new executive order does provide that if you are meeting in a hybrid model, in other words, you are allowing board members who wish to participate in person to do so while providing a virtual opportunity for board members and the public, that you must make provisions for some members of the public and the press to participate in person. Now, that to me creates a very large logistical challenge, particularly given that boards of education are of great interest these days, particularly to parents and teachers in the community. And I've heard of boards that have gotten 200 pieces of public comment in a virtual format. CCM and COST are tasked, according to the governor's statewide municipal call late yesterday, with developing guidance around this executive order. It's often more helpful if we get the guidance and the executive order at the same time. I did speak this morning to Mark Samaruga, who literally wrote the book on the Freedom of Information Act that CABE helps disseminate. And he has been promised that he will have some level of input into that guidance, but shares the concern that you could have 200 people show up at a board meeting and have no way of ensuring appropriate physical distancing. We did update our guidance on the CABE website, the COVID resource guidance around freedom of information and public meetings. That was done late yesterday. Our advice to you is to work with your local public health department, determine what an appropriate capacity would be for members of the public to participate in person, and make very clear when you disseminate your agenda that the remote opportunity will still be available, and to strongly encourage people to continue to use that opportunity for the health and safety of everyone. And if anyone has any further questions on that, I'm happy to try to answer them. If not, this is now your opportunity for sharing. I do want to call one, since we have board chairs as a captive audience, just to remind you that CABE's Delegate Assembly will be held in a virtual format this year. It will be held on November 19th, thank you, at 2 p.m. That's the date it was scheduled to be held in person. We will be providing the opportunity so that you will be able to engage in discussion as well as vote on the resolutions. You should have received electronically the resolutions and the process for you to be able to register. We do need you to register one or more delegates, depending upon the size of district, in advance. And we are also, in order to make sure that this process is transparent, we are borrowing some procedures that were used by the National School Boards Association at their delegate assembly in August, requiring that any amendments as well as requests to remove items from the consent calendar be submitted in advance. And that procedure is outlined in the material you've received. So board chairs, what would you like to share? What's on your mind? What's going well?
Patrice, this is, Andy George.
Hi, Andy.
Hey, just a quick follow-up on what you were talking about, because I've got, for the last couple months, I've got a couple board members who'd like to go to the boardroom in our government center. So out of a 9-person board, three show up there. The rest, everybody else is doing it remote. So would this new order imply that if the 3 of them continue to decide to show up in the boardroom at the government center, that we suddenly have to provide for public?
My answer at the moment, not having any further guidance than a 1-paragraph executive order, is no. I presume that they're going to the government center because there's better connectivity, there's better equipment for them to participate. You are not convening the meeting in the government center. They're simply going there to use that facility. So I would say that does not open the door to then having to provide for public in-person participation.
Great, thank you.
Patrice, it's Eileen Baker. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Eileen.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Although I'm not a board chair, I wanted to share, as I did with Bob, maybe you all know that CCM now is actually presenting an opportunity for discussions across the state on equity and racism. And hopefully you've gotten those invitations to participate.
Thanks, Eileen.
You're welcome.
Leslie, would you like to ask your question? Let's see. It looks like you're having an issue on your end. You are unmuted. Okay. She's going to call in again.
Hi, this is Deborah Kane from the Middletown Board of Ed. I just have a question for those who have decided to go, for the schools that decided to go full re-entry, how that's working, and for those that have decided to go full re-entry and have had to redact because of, COVID cases. And then for the other boards that are in hybrid model that continue to stay in that realm, how is the public taking it in your area to stay in that area? I just know that Middletown is definitely having a tough time. We decided to stay in hybrid model because the numbers will continue to rise, and trying to make our families feel good about it. Our teachers love it. They're happy, but our parents are definitely some, not all, majority are glad that we are staying in the hybrid model, but we definitely have some parents that are upset about it. So I just want to know from everyone how they're handling that in their district. Sorry for the long question.
Board chairs, what's your experience?
In Westport, we have exactly the same situation, exactly. 100%.
In Bloomfield, we are basically the same. We are in hybrid model. We're going to stay in hybrid model for God knows how long, but it's working, so we're going to be there. But more importantly for us, because parents are happy, we're not getting any complaints from parents. But again, more importantly is that we're getting no pushback at all from teachers. In fact, our teacher group is very happy the way things are going. And and believe it or not, we just got our superintendent just got notice from with CEA. He's going to be interviewed next week on how and why things are going so well in Bloomfield. So, and I was kind of surprised to hear that coming from the CEA and our past relationships with them. But things are well in the hybrid model, and we've had very few COVID cases that popped up. So maybe that's the reasoning.
Terrific. Anyone else want to share their experience?
Sure. This is Peter Bernstein from Greenwich. So we are full-time for K to 8, and then our high school is hybrid just based on size. So far, so good. We also obviously are operating fully remote for K to 5, and then for those remote students for middle and high school, they're actually dialing into the live classes. So far, so good. We've had a number of positive cases with teachers and students. Most of those are actually, I think all of those now have been traced to outside activities, so not from being in school. It's required quarantining, obviously, which is unfortunate, but the smart thing to do. We're cohorting as best we can in the middle school and the high school. We do 2 days on, everybody's remote on Wednesday, and then 2 days for the other cohort on Thursday and Friday. And again, we're watching the positivity rate. Another story in the newspaper this morning about it, so we'll just have to keep an eye on it. And by the way, we also get emails from parents asking when we're going to go full-time in the high school. So obviously something's going right.
Great.
This is Andy. Again, I'd like to follow up on that with Peter because he's our neighbor, of course. And I guess, so being able to do the in-person, we're doing entirely hybrid, and we have the Distance Learning Academy for those who want to stay home, but we don't do the full-time in-person because we're following a 6-foot distance rule throughout the district. But do I understand it right that depending on the locality and the health department, you might be doing, and this is what I understood from Greenwich, is that they were doing more like a 4-foot distancing model for the K to 8. Is that right?
Yeah, so where we can, we're certainly trying to do the 6 feet. Some of our elementary school buildings are a lot older. I think the average age of our building dates to about 1957, and that's accounting for the fact that we've got 3 newer elementary schools. Our oldest elementary building's from 1902, so the classrooms are varying sizes, and it makes it impossible. But in those rooms where we can't do the 6 feet, like the elementary room, we have these shields for each of the desks. We're doing everything we can to basically account for the distance. 3 feet was the Connecticut recommendation. It certainly doesn't feel like enough when you're sitting in there. So again, we're doing the cleaning, we're doing the masks, we're doing the distancing where possible, we're using the shields. And again, I really am knocking on wood right now that so far that's held.
Thanks. And I think the consistent message that we have heard from the Connecticut Department of Public Health is that is a suite of mitigation strategies. And if you are not able to fully implement one of them, then the others become even more important. I think Leslie has been able to rejoin us. So Leslie, if you want to ask your question.
Thank you. I hate to take us back to what we were discussing when I originally had a question. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Patrice, currently we are operating our board meetings in what some might call a hybrid mode. So we are in person, 6 foot apart from each other, wearing masks. We have opened it up to public participation 2 ways. We have a Google Meets live stream on the overhead projector in the lecture hall where we have our board meeting. People can publicly participate through that process. In addition to that, they can RSVP to a specific email address if they would like to request to be in person. Once we've reached the number of RSVPs that we've worked out with our health department in terms of the room size, we then tell them that they have to go on Google Meets if they want to participate. Do you think that covers us in terms of the regulations of having to allow people to come in public?
I believe that it does, again, pending any additional guidance that comes out around this. But in terms of just the executive order on its face, you have a process in place that is in compliance with your local health department's guidance. And it does provide for some members of the public to participate. The only thing I would add is if any member of the press also wanted to participate in person, attend in person, you need to have a provision for that as well.
We do. We don't allow any of the back seats to be filled in with the RSVP. So we always have an additional few spaces. You know, obviously some of the spaces go to family members of, say, somebody that we're recognizing, but it hasn't been an issue so far. But I'm glad to think you think we're in compliance. Thank you.
Good. Thanks for sharing that. Other questions or comments?
Patrice, there's a question in the chat box from Megan.
Okay, you want to read it?
Sure. Woodstock is remaining in hybrid and has brought back students with special needs and the children of staff members who are considered essential for 4 days a week. We have received mixed reaction. Those who are unhappy with this decision have been very vocal about their displeasure and are pushing back. Like Bloomfield, our staff supports the decision to remain in hybrid, and we cannot bring everyone back and keep the 6-foot rule. Our health department supports our decision.
Very helpful information, and I think in most cases, Bloomfield seems to be a happy exception. In most cases, you're not going to make everyone happy. You're going to you will continue to make your decisions based on the health and safety of your students and staff. Other comments?
I'll just add to that people seem to be fairly happy. So currently Newtown, this is Michelle, I'm sorry, from Newtown. So we started off in the hybrid model, K through 12, went to all in for K through 6, starting in October, and then planning on taking 7 through 12, all in 5 days a week, starting in beginning of November. And it does seem that even though we lay out that has been the plan all along, it does seem that every time the change happens, we always get feedback. And it's either people who weren't aware of the plan or just don't, you know, they don't like the change that's happening and want to provide feedback at that time. It seems like there's a lull in between the times when there's everything is the same as it has been for weeks, and then the change gets people to thinking about change and providing feedback.
Hopefully it's constructive feedback, but I realize that sometimes it might not be.
Yeah.
Other comments? John, go ahead. John Prince. You were waving at me.
He seems to be having trouble with it. No, he's unmuted, but he's having trouble.
All right, anyone else?
Patrice, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Eileen.
Yeah, it's Eileen.
Yep.
Thanks so much. Actually, just wanted to let those participating know, Osabrook's had some cases of COVID, and what has come to pass is that when they did some of the contact tracing, teachers have had to quarantine, so they weren't able to bring all the students back. So that may be impactful just for other board chairs to know.
Exactly. We've seen that in a number of districts, that it's a staffing issue that has caused either a continuation in hybrid or in some cases temporarily going back to fully remote because of staff quarantine requirements. The other thing that we continue to hear on the weekly Department of Public Health calls is that there, with a couple of isolated exceptions, they are not seeing any transmission in the school setting, that the cases are coming in from activities outside of school and being brought into the school setting.
I also just wanted to share where I work. Killingly Public Schools has shut down for 2 weeks due to COVID.
And is that because of staffing issues, contact tracing?
I think it's contact tracing.
Yeah.
I think they found it at a high school, but they felt just for safety reasons, the contact tracing may needed to be extended, and so.
Thanks, Eileen.
So can you hear me now?
David, you're good. You're good, John. Go ahead.
Okay, I came out and came back in. I'm not sure if I missed anything there, but the one thing that we have found seems to work really well, and this is fully supported by our public health department, is to make it very clear for people to understand that our decision making is based on the latest information from the public health experts. And they have literally said, make us be the bad guys if you need somebody to blame, because this is the way it has to be.
Yeah, very good point. And I think we've tried as an organization very hard from the very beginning to emphasize that the health and safety were the first priority in all of the decision making around schools. Yeah. Susan Davis, you have a comment or a question? I guess I can read it. How are districts determining how to decide who quarantines, whether it be the entire class, and how many days are you keeping people out on quarantine? Is that the question?
Yeah. This is Sue Davis from Suffield. I was just asking, to kind of get different ideas of quarantining lengths. We quarantine for 14 days from the point of exposure, but we have heard others are doing 10. And then, we also, I think, have a very large net for quarantining, and we've heard some districts are doing quadrants like in their classrooms and things such as that. So I was just wondering, obviously Suffield, I think we've been in the news last night because we've had I think 6 cases in three of our schools in the last 2 weeks. I will say though that a couple of those cases were family related. So there were a number of kids in the same family that tested positive. So, it's not as widespread, but that can't obviously go out. So, we're kind of looking at our procedures of what we're, how long we're keeping people out and how we determine who quarantines, because staffing is a huge issue. That's pretty much the reason why we had to go remote at the high school this week and then remote at the middle school the following week. Thank you.
My understanding is, again, from the State Department of Public Health, that the decisions about who needs to quarantine come from your local health department after they've done the contact tracing. I don't know if any of the board chairs have had any other experience. All right, any final comments or questions for the good of the group? Erica from Clinton has 2 observations. Do you want to share?
Yep, sorry, I was just trying to get myself unmuted. So the first is that I know I hit return too quickly, but then I figured it'd probably be easier to explain it in person. The first of which is that we've now kind of entered a phase where we're kind of having to be crisis managers sometimes in that, and not necessarily in the way that we kind of expected. We've had some incidents where, in particular, students have reported on social media that they were positive when they in fact were not. And it has become very apparent that we not only need to communicate when there is positivity, but address head on when there's reported positivity and there is in fact not, because that can kind of put the element of doubt out there, which doesn't help any of us. So that's one thing that I want board chairs to kind of be aware of and to share with their superintendents, because acting quickly and decisively when there isn't something to report might be just as important as doing so when there is something to report. And then to end on a positive note, so maybe my timing is perfect, I just do want to give a shout out to Patrice, who came to share with us last week. And I think really gave our board both a well-needed and firm kind of reminder of why we're here and what we're supposed to be doing, as well as kind of inspiring us to what we can be doing and what we will be doing over the next few years as we, in particular in Clinton, launch into our strategic planning process. So I want to, I guess, serendipitously end on a positive note and give a shout out to Patrice and say, for any chairs who are kind of feeling in that betwixt and between position, I would highly recommend having Patrice come speak to your board, because it was a wonderful conversation and well needed at this time.
Erica, thank you so much. And we have a great team at CABE. We have a number of our members of senior staff, particularly Nick Caruso, that many of you have had him come and work with your board. So it's definitely a team activity. And I'm very happy to end on that positive note. We look forward to talking with you again in 2 weeks as we continue to work together through this process. On behalf of the CABE staff, we hope that you stay safe and stay well. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.